The Honourable Marama Davidson.
Ngā mihi e te māngai. To the Prime Minister, does he stand by all his government statements and policies?
With regard to evidence and information at the time of those statements, yes. But of course, when new information or evidence emerges, we acknowledge that and don't just carry on like a bigoted lefty shill.
Can I just remind the member, the question is to the Acting Prime Minister, and Hansard will record that.
Does he agree with the statement made by then Deputy Prime Minister Winston Peters in 2018 that the oil and gas ban, quote, makes sense, and that introducing the ban was the change that New Zealanders wanted?
Dynamic.
Can I just say that the Prime Minister has, and this government has its settings on the future, and if the Prime Minister and that member, with the question, was to go back and examine the time and the place when that statement was made, there was a ban on at the time. Does that member not forget or not remember that?
Is reopening the New Zealand coast to oil and gas exploration a contradiction to the Minister for Climate Change's call for a global agreement to phase out fossil fuels at COP28?
On behalf of the Prime Minister, right now at COP28 they are wrestling with that very issue, and they'll be probably working days longer than that because they haven't come to an agreement. And the two representatives at that time, the previous member and minister in charge of it and the present minister, are doing a fine job to ensure that New Zealand's commitments remain the same going forward.
Call Stephen Abel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does he agree with the United Nations Secretary-General that, quote, the 1.5 degree limit is only possible if we ultimately stop burning all fossil fuels, not reduce, not abate, and if not, why not?
With respect to that questioner, the UN Secretary-General, Guterres, has made it very, very clear that this is a subject for COP28, and he's awaiting the outcome for that, and so are we as contributors.
Steve Abel. Sorry.
Does he consider the repeal of the ban on oil and gas exploration to be a betrayal of our Pacific neighbours, who today called for a global phase-out of fossil fuels as the only way to save the Pacific from going to, quote, their watery graves?
No, we do not, and the reason is very simple. We are in the middle of a transition, and rather than bringing in a whole lot of inferior Indonesian coal, which the previous government was doing, we're looking for safer products to take us. Well, that they might think this is a laughing matter here, they're scoffing over here, bought in all that Indonesian coal, trying to excuse themselves, and not even using New Zealand coal, which would have been a better, more cleaner substitute. And here we go now into a transition where gas will be very critical. And when we get there, we'll be able to face the Pacific nations and have done our duty to them as well.
Move now to question number 3. And over the Right Honourable Chris Hipkins.
Mr. Speaker, to the Acting Prime Minister, does he stand by all of his government statements and actions? That's you. That's you.
The pause was because the same question was asked when it was question 2, and did not the former Prime Minister see that? The answer is ditto.
Mr. Speaker, does he stand by his government's commitment in the National Act coalition document to, quote, amend the Overseas Investment Act 2005 to limit ministerial decision-making to national security concerns? And is he confident that all parties in the coalition will be supporting that amendment?
If that wasn't the case, we would not have signed up to it. But the reality is, I said if that was not the case, we would not have signed up to it. Words matter, Mr. Robinson, not just gobbledygook. And here comes the reason we signed up to it. The reason we signed up to it was because we could see under the previous administration they had no idea of the importance of international investment and the security of long-term policy which persuades people to come here.
Oh, Mr. Speaker, does he agree with Winston Peters in 2017 that, quote, last year 465,000 hectares of land was sold to foreigners. That's up to 4 times on the year before. We in New Zealand First are going to stop land sales to foreigners and house sales to foreigners who don't come and live here. If not, why not?
Words matter. Well, can I just say that having heard that quote from one of the brightest guys that have ever come to this parliament, it was voiced by not me, a previous Labor Party person said that. I was just borrowing his words. But the point of the matter is that we were looking to ensure that any offshore investment in this country had the national interest and economic benefit of New Zealand, like Ireland, like countries like Singapore, first in mind. And with that in mind, we welcome overseas investment.
Parliamentary question, Mr Speaker. So why is the government repealing that test from the Act?
Because like everything that Labor Party put its hands on, they didn't interpret it properly.
Mr Speaker, does he stand by his government's commitment to repeal the Reserve Bank of New Zealand Monetary Policy Amendment Act, or does he agree with Shane Jones that the dual mandate brings us, quote, into international best practice area? This is not a journey into the unknown. This is to link up progressive, far-sighted government passing legislation that shows a great similarity to other reserve banks in their mandates, which have moved away from this bare, sparse, barren approach reflective of Don Brash's stewardship of said bank.
I'm certain that members and those in the gallery and those who are watching on TV are going to enjoy today's conversation because they're hearing so many wise words being repeated back to them, in this case by the opposition, with respect to National Party members. But we have to move on. And the point is this. No, we have to move on in this context. Because the Minister of Finance is wrestling with something very similar to what's emerged in Australia lately, and that is inflation, unlike the previous Finance Minister said, is not foreign-grown, it's home-grown, and massively so, because of their squanderous expenditure. And that's why we had to have a talk with the Governor of the Reserve Bank and get him to help us both ways to turn back the tide of inflation and give New Zealanders a chance to go into the future, the hope that we'll have a better cost of living.
Supplementary question. Does he therefore agree with Winston Peters that the Reserve Bank of New Zealand Monetary Policy Amendment Act, quote, makes it very important changes to the Reserve Bank Act that will significantly improve monetary policy as it relates to its impact on New Zealanders and the real economy, end quote? If so, why is the government repealing them?
Because at the time that Winston Peters said that, he was having regard to an immigration policy which he had persuaded the then government to adapt. It hardly got there, and when the handbrake went off, they ran amok, and in the last year have brought in 118,000 immigrants. That's a massive record for this country. No infrastructure, no houses, no health, no nothing, and he now wants us to carry on with the same policy. No, it's important that we address the circumstances we're in right now left by them.
Mr Speaker.
Point of order, Kieran McAnulty.
That was an interesting answer, but it wasn't to the question. The question was about the Reserve Bank, not about what was talked about.
Well, the question was actually about a quote from the Right Honourable Winston Peters from some time ago and what the Acting Prime Minister thought of that quote. And I think he answered it fairly concisely.
Does the Prime Minister or the Acting Prime Minister agree with David Seymour that, quote, you can't trust Winston Peters and a lot of things will be much, much harder than they otherwise would, and that Winston Peters is, quote, just a muppet? The problem is he can't work with anyone. The good news is he's going down in flames. He's yesterday's man. And if not, why not?
Because even politically, as the good book says, nobody's beyond redemption. Nobody's for not understanding how helpful a person can be. And the people who should be the authority on that are sitting over there. Because without our open-mindedness and liberality, no one would have ever heard of those people ever again. But they hardly got the job and they thought they got there by themselves, and when the handbrake left, what a mess they were. And my evidence for that is, in their first week of being a parliamentary opposition, they asked 6,000 questions, which kind of suggests in 2020 to 2023, they had no answers.